Chapter 1. An Unwelcome Welcome. The elegant dining room of Chez Pierre sparked with crystal and fine china, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness in front of me. What should have been my welcome party had devolved into yet another opportunity for Victoria Pierce, my department head, to demonstrate her cruelty.
"Someone with just a GED like you doesn't belong in a place like this,"
Victoria said, her perfectly painted lips curving into a sneer.
"Know your place. You're 100 years too early to be dining at an establishment of this caliber."
I sat there, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, watching as she took another deliberate bite of her steaming hot dish, her expression one of exaggerated pleasure. Around her, her chosen circle of favorites savored their own meals while shooting me smug looks. The waiter approached, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. But he only placed a small crystal bowl of water in front of me, a finger bowl, meant for cleaning one's hands between courses. Victoria's eyes lit up with malicious glee.
"Well, I guess it would be too cruel to give you absolutely nothing," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Why don't you just sip on that water? That's more your speed anyway, huh?"
She dipped her manicured fingers in her own finger bowl and then flicked them in my direction, sending tiny droplets of water across the table. The cold water hit my face, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. What is wrong with this woman, I thought, fighting back tears of frustration. Just then, a familiar voice rang out across the restaurant. "Sorry I'm late. Has the welcome party started already?" Victoria's head snapped up, and I watched as all the color drained from her face. Standing in the doorway, elegant and composed, was Mrs. Anderson, our CEO. Chapter 2. The Path to Here. My name is Sarah Waters, and my story begins far from the glittering world of corporate headquarters and fancy French restaurants. For as long as I can remember, it was just my mom, my younger siblings, and me, scraping by on welfare and whatever extra money we could cobble together. Mom's illness kept her from working, and as the eldest child, I knew the responsibility fell to me. The weight of that knowledge settled onto my shoulders early, becoming heavier with each passing year. Every morning, I would wake up before dawn to help our elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, with his paper route. The few dollars I earned hardly made a dent in our needs, but it was something. I can still remember the day I made the decision to drop out of high school. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was sitting at our worn kitchen table, watching my younger siblings share a single bowl of cereal. The choice felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability, a step I had to take for their sake. The local drugstore wasn't much to look at. Fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead, linoleum floors that had seen better days, and shelves stocked with everything from bandages to bubble bath. But to me, it became a sanctuary of possibility. My first day there, I was a bundle of nerves, fumbling with the register and apologizing to every customer for my slowness.
"Hey, take a breath,"
said Maya, one of the senior staff members. She had kind eyes and steady hands that had been working for a register for 15 years. "Everyone starts somewhere. I'll show you the ropes." Maya became my first mentor, teaching me not just how to operate the register, but how to really connect with customers. During quiet moments, she'd share stories about her own journey, about raising her kids while working full-time, about finding dignity in honest work. "The thing about customer service," she told me one slow afternoon, "is that it's not just about transactions. It's about seeing people, really seeing them." Those words stuck with me, especially as I began to explore the cosmetics section during my breaks. I'd stand in front of the small mirror by the makeup display, studying my reflection. The face that looked back at me was Plain, the same face that had earned me the nickname Plain Jane in elementary school. But as I began to experiment with different products, I discovered something magical. It started small, a touch of mascara here, a hint of blush there. But soon, I was spending every spare moment practicing, learning, transforming. The other girls who worked at the store noticed, and soon they were asking me for advice.
"Sarah, how do you get your eyeliner so perfect?"
they'd ask. Or, "Can you show me how to do that smoky eye look?" I remembered what Maya had said about seeing people, and I realized makeup could do exactly that. help people see themselves in a new light. Each time I helped someone find the right shade of foundation or taught them how to apply concealer, I wasn't just selling products, I was sharing confidence. During this time, my thoughts often drifted to my former classmates. I'd see them passing by the store in their school uniforms, laughing and chatting about homework and crushes. The sight would send a sharp pang through my chest, a reminder of the path I couldn't take. But then I looked down at my hands, steady now from hours of practice with brushes and applicators, and remind myself that I was building my own path. My big break came through an unexpected channel. I had been filming myself practicing makeup techniques at home, using my phone propped up against a stack of books. It wasn't anything fancy, just me, sitting cross-legged on my bed, talking through each step as I applied different products. Today, we're going to try something different, I'd say to my imaginary audience, explaining each technique as I went along. The key to a natural look is building in layers. I never intended for anyone to see these videos. They were just my way of studying my own technique, of tracking my progress. But one day during lunch break, while I was reviewing one of my practice videos, my supervisor happened to walk by.
Is that you?
She asked, peering over my shoulder at my phone screen. I nearly dropped my sandwich in surprise. Oh, yes, I just film myself practicing sometimes to improve my technique. But instead of dismissing it as silly, she sat down next to me, her eyes fixed on the screen. This is exactly what I've been looking for, she said, almost to herself. I remember looking at her in confusion. What do you mean? She turned to me with an intensity I'd never seen before. Sarah, how would you feel about doing this for the company? And just like that, my life changed direction again. But this time, instead of closing doors, new ones were opening. The company was looking for fresh ways to connect with customers, to show that beauty wasn't just for models and actresses, it was for everyone. Little did I know that this opportunity would eventually lead me to corporate headquarters and to a welcome party that would change everything. But before we get to that part of the story, let me tell you about the months that followed, about the videos that would transform not just my face, but my entire life. The conference room became my studio. Every morning, I'd arrive an hour early to set up the lighting and prepare my workspace. The company's premium products were laid out before me like an artist's palette. Foundations, concealers, eyeshadows in every shade imaginable. The small camera mounted beside the mirror captured every detail as I transformed myself from barefaced to glamorous. The secret, I'd explain to the camera, isn't about hiding who you are. It's about enhancing what makes you unique. My hands would move confidently across my face as I demonstrated each technique, sharing tips I'd learned through countless hours of practice. See how this concealer brightens the under eye area? It's not about covering up tiredness, it's about bringing light to your face. The first video went viral within days. Comments flooded in. Finally, someone who shows makeup on a real person. I've never seen anyone explain technique so clearly. This is the first time I've actually felt like I could do this myself. The marketing team was ecstatic. Sales of featured products skyrocketed, especially among young consumers who had previously felt intimidated by high-end cosmetics. Retailers couldn't keep the products in stock. But success brought its own challenges. One morning, I overheard two executives talking outside the conference room. She's good, but is she really the image we want for the brand? One asked. She's so ordinary.
Ordinary is selling like hotcakes right now,
the other replied.
Besides, Mrs. Anderson seems to see something in her.
I pretended not to hear them as I set up for the day's shoot, but their words stuck with me. Was I too ordinary? Not polished enough? Then I remembered all the comments from viewers who said they finally felt seen, finally felt beautiful. That's when Mrs. Anderson first approached me. She came to the conference room one afternoon after I finished filming. You know what I love about your videos, Sarah? She said, studying the array of products I was carefully organizing. You don't just show people how to apply makeup. You show them how to see their own beauty. I looked up, surprised by both her presence and her words. Mrs. Anderson was legendary in the industry, known for her sharp business acumen and innovative vision. She picked up one of the foundations I'd used in that day's video. When I started in this industry, she continued, beauty was presented as something exclusive, something only attainable for a select few. But you're changing that narrative. She placed the foundation back on the table and turned to face me directly. How would you feel about helping me change more than just our marketing approach? That conversation led to my transfer to headquarters. But before I could start my new role, Mrs. Anderson had a special assignment for me. She needed someone to investigate the troubling pattern of resignations in Victoria Pierce's department. Someone who could observe without drawing attention. Your background makes you perfect for this, Mrs. Anderson explained. Victoria won't see you as a threat. She'll underestimate you, just like so many others have. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted by that assessment, but I understood the logic. Still, nothing could have prepared me for my first day at headquarters, or for meeting Victoria Pierce herself. The headquarters building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, worlds away from my humble drugstore beginnings. As I stepped into the elevator, my reflection in the polished door showed a woman who looked professional and put together. A far cry from the nervous teenager who had dropped out of high school. But underneath that carefully applied makeup, my heart was racing. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and I took a deep breath before stepping out. The atmosphere here was different, more intense, more polished. Designer heels clicked against marble floors, and the air seemed to buzz with ambition. That's when I first saw her, Victoria Pierce, the department head whose reign of terror had driven so many employees to quit. She was even more beautiful than I'd been told, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. But there was something cold in her perfect smile, something calculating in her eyes as she looked me up and down.
So, you're Sarah Waters,
she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes dismissive.
I saw your videos, though honestly, I was so distracted by how plain you looked that I could hardly focus on the makeup products.
She laughed as if she made a clever joke, and several of her followers, I couldn't think of them as proper colleagues, tittered along with her. In that moment, I understood exactly why Mrs. Anderson had chosen me for this assignment. Victoria's casual cruelty, her obvious disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her, would make her blind to who I really was. Little did she know that her welcome party would be her ultimate undoing. The weeks leading up to that fateful dinner were a masterclass in workplace manipulation. Victoria had perfected the art of maintaining her power through a careful balance of favoritism and fear. Her inner circle, all carefully selected for their beauty and willingness to follow her lead, functioned as both her shield and her sword. One morning, I arrived early to find Lisa, one of the newer employees, crying in the break room. Her mascara had left dark streaks down her cheeks.
I can't take it anymore,
she whispered when I sat down beside her.
Victoria assigned me 3 major projects yesterday, all due by the end of the week. When I told her it wasn't possible, she said maybe I wasn't cut out for corporate life.
I handed her a tissue and my concealer, the one I featured in my latest video. Here, this will help with the redness. Tell me more about these projects. As Lisa talked, I began to see the pattern. Victoria would deliberately overload certain employees while her favorites spent their days extending 2-hour lunch breaks into entire afternoons. The workload wasn't just unfair, it was impossible by design. How does she get away with it? I wondered aloud one evening, as I helped another colleague, Michael, sort through a mountain of reports that Victoria's favorites had dumped on his desk. Michael glanced around nervously before answering. Haven't you noticed? Every few weeks she has dinner with that older executive. That's the vice chairman, Mrs. Anderson's husband. The revelation hit me like a splash of cold water. I remembered seeing them together, the way Victoria had touched his arm, laughed at his jokes. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now the pieces were falling into place. That's how she maintains her position, Michael continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Anyone who complains mysteriously finds himself transferred to less desirable departments or pushed out entirely. I thought about Mrs. Anderson, about the faith she'd placed in me to uncover the truth. The stakes were higher than I'd realized. Victoria's cruelty toward me escalated daily, perhaps because I refused to show how much her words stung. Each morning, she brought a new barrage of subtle jabs and not-so-subtle humiliations.
Oh, Sarah,
she'd say loud enough for everyone to hear.
I noticed you're wearing the same blazer as yesterday. I know someone with your background might not understand corporate fashion, but do try to maintain some standards.
Her favorites would snicker, but I caught the flash of guilt in some of their eyes. They knew they could easily be in my position if they fell from Victoria's grace. The tension came to a head one afternoon when Victoria stormed out of her office, waving a report I'd prepared.
"This is completely unacceptable," she announced to the entire floor. "I know you only have a GED, but surely even you can understand the basic business concepts."
I kept my voice steady as I replied. I followed the standard format and double-checked all the figures. If there's something specific you'd like me to revise.
"Not the specific problem," she cut me off, "is that someone like you is trying to handle work meant for educated professionals. Maybe you should stick to playing with makeup in front of a camera."
The irony of her using my videos to insult me, the very videos that had revolutionized the company's market presence, wasn't lost on me. But I had to maintain my cover, so I simply nodded and asked for her corrections. That evening, as I was gathering evidence of Victoria's misconduct, I received the email about my welcome party at Chez Pierre. The invitation dripped with the same false sweetness as Victoria's smile.
"I do hope you can attend," she'd written. "It would be such a shame if you miss your own party."
The threat was clear. Refuse and face the consequences. Accept and endure whatever humiliation she had planned. Either way, Victoria believed she would win. But as I sat at that elegant table at Chez Pierre, watching her flick water from her finger bowl toward my face, I knew the time had finally come. Victoria had orchestrated every detail of this evening to maximize my humiliation, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. Pride comes before a fall. When Mrs. Anderson's voice rang out across the restaurant, I felt a calm settle over me. All the pieces were in place. The recorder in my purse had captured weeks of Victoria's abuse. The accounting department had quietly provided documentation of her misappropriated expenses. And now, the CEO herself was here to witness Victoria's true nature firsthand. The look of shock on Victoria's face as Mrs. Anderson approached our table was something I'll never forget. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face, leaving her almost ghostly under the restaurant's elegant lighting.
"Mrs. Anderson?"
Victoria stammered, her voice shifting to that syrupy sweet tone she reserved for superiors.
"What an unexpected pleasure. We were just having a small welcome celebration for Sarah."
Mrs. Anderson's eyes traveled from the empty space in front of me to the finger bowl, then to the water droplets still glistening on my cheek. Her expression remained pleasant, but I could see steel beneath her smile. "Indeed," Mrs. Anderson said, pulling out a chair and seating herself at our table. "No, I must say, this is quite different from the welcome parties I usually attend. Sarah, where is your meal?" Before I could respond, Victoria jumped in.
"Oh, there must have been some confusion with the order. I'll call the waiter right away."
"No need," Mrs. Anderson interrupted softly. "I believe I understand the situation perfectly." She turned to face me, and I knew this was the moment we'd been waiting for. "Sarah, I think it's time." I took a deep breath and stood, smoothing down my blazer with steady hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. You're right, it is time." I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of Victoria and her shocked followers. I should properly introduce myself. I'm Sarah Waters, Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Innovation. The silence that followed was deafening. One of Victoria's favorites actually dropped her fork, the clatter against fine china making everyone jump. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle.
"This is a joke, right? Her? An executive VP? She's just a chump with a GED who got lucky with some viral videos."
"Those viral videos," Mrs. Anderson interjected, "revolutionized our entire marketing strategy and doubled our market share among younger demographics. But that's not why Sarah is our new executive VP." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the table. "She's in this position because she understands something that you, Victoria, never grasped, the true meaning of leadership." Victoria's composure was cracking.
But what about my achievements? My connections? The deals I've brought in?"
"You mean the excessive expense reports disguised as business meetings?" I asked, pulling out a folder from my bag. "Or perhaps you're referring to your special networking sessions with the vice chairman." The color that had drained from Victoria's face rushed back in an angry flood.
You've been spying on me? Recording me? How dare you?"
"How dare I?" I repeated, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "How dare I document systematic workplace abuse? How dare I investigate the misuse of company funds? How dare I expose an affair that violates every ethical standard this company holds?" I placed a small recorder on the table. Would you like to hear some highlights from the past few weeks? Mrs. Anderson raised her hand, stopping me before I could press play. That won't be necessary right now, Sarah. I believe the board will find all of this very interesting during tomorrow's morning's emergency meeting. She turned to Victoria, who had slumped in her chair. All pretense of superiority evaporated. Victoria, I suggest you use this time to prepare your resignation letter, though I doubt it will make much difference to the outcome.
You can't do this to me,
Victoria whispered, but the threat in her voice had been replaced by desperation.
I've given everything to this company.
No, Victoria. Mrs. Anderson corrected her gently. You've taken everything you could from this company. Resources, time, other people's opportunities. And now it's time for you to give it all back. One by one, Victoria's favorites began to shift away from her, physical distance reflecting the sudden change in loyalty. The woman who had seemed invincible just hours before now sat alone in her expensive dress, her power evaporating like morning dew. I believe this concludes our welcome party, Mrs. Anderson announced, standing. Sarah, would you join me for dinner? I know a lovely Italian place just around the corner that serves the most amazing risotto. As we left Chez Pierre, I heard Victoria's muffled sobs behind us. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. After all, I knew what it was like to have your world turned upside down. But then I remembered Lisa's tears in the break room, Michael's late night fixing others' works, and all the careers Victoria damaged or destroyed to maintain her position. Sometimes, I realized karma arrives wearing Chanel and carries a voice recorder in her purse. The aftermath of that dinner sent shockwaves through the company. The next morning, as I walked into headquarters, the atmosphere was electric with whispered conversations and furtive glances. Victoria's desk was already empty, her personal items packed away in the night like a vanished kingdom. The emergency board meeting lasted 6 hours. One by one, Victoria's closest allies were called in to give statements. Some tried to defend her, but faced with evidence, the recorded conversations, the doctored expense reports, the testimony of dozens of effective employees, their loyalty crumbled like a poorly built foundation. I never thought it would go this far, one of her former favorites confessed to me later, her eyes brimming with tears. At first, it was just little things, taking longer lunches, passing off some work to others. But then, it's always just little things at first, I replied, remembering my own journey. Until suddenly you look in the mirror and don't recognize who you've become. The investigation into Victoria's conduct uncovered more than we anticipated. Years of financial manipulation, countless careers derailed through her machinations, and a web of influence that extended far beyond our company walls. The scandal with the vice chairman proved especially painful for Mrs. Anderson. I found her one evening in her office, staring out at the city lights. She'd just finished signing the divorce papers. You know, Sarah, she said without turning around, I built this company believing that beauty should empower people, not destroy them. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. It's not too late to find it again, I offered, thinking of my own path from high school dropout to executive VP. She turned to me then, a determined gleam in her eye. You're right, and I know exactly where we should start. The changes we implemented over the next few months transformed the company from the inside out. First, we established an anonymous reporting system that allowed employees to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. The old hierarchy of favorites and outcasts was dismantled, replaced by a merit-based system that recognized actual contributions rather than superficial qualities. But our most significant change came in how we approached leadership. We initiated a mentorship program, pairing experienced employees with newcomers. The program was open to everyone, regardless of their educational background or appearance. Remember how you felt at that drugstore? Mrs. Anderson reminded me as we finalized the program details. Sometimes all people need is someone to see their potential. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Some of Victoria's former allies struggled to adapt to the new culture of accountability and collaboration. Others, who had lived in fear of her reign, needed time to trust that the changes were real. One morning, about 6 months after the welcome party incident, I arrived at work to find Lisa, the same Lisa who had once cried in the break room, leading a team meeting. Her presentation was confident, her ideas innovative. As I watched her field questions from senior executives, I felt a warm glow of pride.
You know what made the difference?
She told me later over coffee.
For the first time, I feel seen. Not just as a face in the crowd, but as a person with something valuable to contribute.
And that's when it hit me. We'd come full circle. Just as makeup had helped me see my own potential, our new company culture was helping others discover theirs. Beauty wasn't just about what you put on your face. It was about creating an environment where everyone could shine. The story of Victoria's downfall became something of a legend in corporate circles, though few knew the full truth. Some said she'd move abroad. Others claimed she was working at a small boutique in the suburbs. What mattered wasn't where she ended up, but the lessons we learned from her reign. My office now sits on the top floor of headquarters, with a view of the city I once thought was far beyond my reach. The walls hold my framed GED certificate, a reminder that education comes in many forms, and success isn't about where you start, but how you treat others along the way. Every morning as I apply my makeup in front of the office mirror, I think about that scared teenager who dropped out of high school to support her family. I think about the drugstore clerk who found her confidence one makeup tutorial at a time. I think about the undercover executive at a welcome party, watching karma unfold over finger bowls and fine china. Each of these versions of me taught me something valuable, that true beauty isn't about perfection, it's about authenticity. And that leadership isn't about power over others, it's about empowering others. And most importantly, that everyone deserves a chance to write their own success story. Mrs. Anderson still runs the company, though she's delegated more day-to-day operations to focus on our charitable foundation, which provides educational opportunities and career training to underprivileged youth. Sometimes, when we're reviewing applications for our mentorship program, she'll smile at me and say, "Just think, there might be another Sarah Waters in this pile." The thought always makes me smile because I know it's true. There are countless others out there, people with dreams bigger than their circumstances, with potential waiting to be recognized. And now, thanks to the changes we've made, they'll have a fair chance to prove themselves. As for me, I still film makeup tutorials, though now they're part of our official corporate training program. Each video starts the same way. Beauty isn't about hiding who you are, it's about revealing who you can become. And in the end, that's what the story is really about. Not just the fall of Victoria Pierce or the rise of Sarah Waters, but the transformation of a company that learned to see beauty in all its forms. Because sometimes, the most beautiful transformations happen not in front of a mirror, but in the moments when we choose to see the best in ourselves and others.